other things behind the scenes, but I think they are sorted and I have to finalize further after this meeting. You are very much welcome and thank you for adopting the report yesterday in the House. Today's agenda is briefing by National Treasury. We initially wanted the Department of Health to also make a presentation, but it looks like their presentation, when they were preparing, they saw that it's one and the same thing that Treasury is going to present. So it will be 2 in 1. I'm just clarifying this so that we don't confuse each other. So National Treasury will be briefing us on the Appropriation Bill B7 of 2022 and the second adjustment appropriation B8 of 2022. That is for the financial year 2021-22. And then there's a part in that presentation that speaks to Department of Health. That is the second adjustment appropriation for the financial year 2021-22, B8 2022. And then after this presentation, we'll allow members to deliberate. Thank you very much, honorable members. Up to you. I'm now officially.
Hello, Chairperson. Hello, Chair. Honorable members, is everyone still on the platform?
We can hear you.
Colleagues?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, okay. I think we have lost the Chairperson. Let me try and assist her. Please give me a second. We are about to go to the second item, apologies. Please give me a second so that I can check what's the problem with the chair. My apologies. Honorable members, my apologies, I've just accepted the chair back. Chairperson?
Yes, I'm back. Thank you very much.
Please take over. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, have you dealt with the apologies?
Not yet, Chairperson. We lost you and I was trying to assist you to reconnect. You can guide us starting from the second agenda item, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, I thought I was audible. Maybe when I was doing the remarks, clarifying what is on the table for us today. And I was now on item 2, requesting you to deal with apologies.
Thank you, Chairperson. From the committee's side, and good morning, honorable members. Chairperson and honorable members, from the committee side, we received one apology from Honorable Karim. He will join the meeting around 10 o'clock. He has got another issue that he needs to attend to for now. With respect to the invited ministers, we received apologies from the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health. They are attending Cabinet Committee meetings, Chairperson, and the Minister of Finance is out of the country I forgot now where in Dakar in Senegal. Yes, my apologies about that, Chair. Thank you. Over to you, Chairperson. And the delegation from National Department of Health is under the leadership of Dr. Buthelezi, the DG, and from the Department of National Treasury, Dr. Modise is leading the National Treasury team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank
Over
you.
to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nodata. Dr. Modise, can you please kickstart the presentation? You'll share the presentation with the Department of Health. Dr. Modise, over to you.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Chair, thank you so much for always providing this opportunity for us. Today, I am with the team, and Nompumelelo Khatebe will do the presentation, and we will take the questions if that's okay with you, Chairperson. Thank you.
It's fine with me. You just continue.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Chair, I see I'm not able to share. May I ask that I be given? Okay, now it looks like it's sorted. Chair, can you please advise if you can see my screen?
We can see it now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good morning to everyone. And thank you once again for the opportunity to make the presentation, Chair. In terms of the outline, as per tradition, we will start off the presentation with some background information, particularly in relation to the provisions in the different legislation, as well as the processes that govern the process of the Appropriation Bill. And then in the second part of the presentation, Chair will then take you through the specific allocations as included in the Appropriation Bill for 2022. And then the last part of the presentation, Chair will also highlight the allocations as included in the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill that was tabled early in January this year. So in terms of background, Chair, starting off with Section 27, 1 of the Public Finance Management Act, it basically requires that the Minister of Finance table the annual budget for the financial year in the National Assembly before the start of the financial year, or if there are exceptional circumstances, on a date as soon as possible after the start of the financial year. And then Section 27(3) basically outlines some of the key elements that the budget that the minister would have tabled should include. And amongst those would be the estimates of revenue and expenditure. It will also include estimates in terms of interest and debt service charges, as well as estimates of all direct charges against the National Revenue Fund. And then also the budget should also include the projected revenue for the previous financial year, as well as expenditure per vote and per main division within the vote for the previous financial year, which is why we show the budget largely in terms of a 7-year period as well. Still in terms of the background, Chair, going to the Section 213 of the Constitution and Section 26 of the PFMA. So firstly, the Appropriation Bill, as a reminder, is the legislation that provides for the appropriation of money by Parliament from the National Revenue Fund, and that's in terms of Section 213 of the Constitution, as well as Section 26 of the Public Finance Management Act. And then if we look at Section 213 of the Constitution specifically, it provides that money may be withdrawn from the National Revenue Fund only in terms of an appropriation by an act of Parliament, which is this bill that we're discussing today, or as a direct charge against that fund when it is provided for in the Constitution. And then Section 26 of the PFMA provides that Parliament must appropriate money for each financial year for the requirements of the state. And then if we go to the Money Bills and Related Mectors Act of 2009, Section 7(1) provides that the Minister of Finance must table the annual budget as set out in Section 27, as discussed in the previous slide, in the National Assembly at the same time as the Appropriation Bill. Early this year, Chair, on the 23rd of February, the Minister of Finance did table the appropriation bill together with the budget on the 23rd of February. The 2022 appropriation bill proposes to appropriate money from the National Revenue Fund for the requirements of the state for the current financial year, which is the 2022-23 financial year, as well as to prescribe conditions for the spending of funds that are withdrawn for the 2023-24 financial year before the commencement of the Appropriation Act for that specific financial year. Moving on to the Parliamentary Process, Chair and Honourable Members, the Money Bills Amendments Procedure and Related Matters Act of 2009 sets out Parliament's role in the budget process and also enhances stakeholder participation and coordination in the budget process. And then when we look at the roles of the different committees, Chair, starting with the Standing Committee on Finance, which is this committee as well, not this committee, sorry, Chair, the Standing Committee on Finance and Appropriations it deals with the budget, and then the portfolio committees will deal with the budget of the individual departments as well as their strategic plans. And then we've got the Public Accounts Committee, which will deal with post-facto issues that are raised by the Auditor General following the audit of their financial and non-financial performance. And then it's very important, Chair, to also highlight that in terms of process, Parliament votes first on the fiscal framework and then the division of revenue bill, and then it's the appropriation bill, which is this bill that we are presenting today. And then to highlight as well, the committees on appropriations may not consider amendments to the appropriation bill prior to the passing of the division of revenue bill. So the bill must be passed first before the committees on appropriations may consider amendments to the appropriation bill. And then lastly, Chair, any amendment to the appropriation bill must be consistent with the adopted fiscal framework and the division of revenue bill as passed by Parliament. Now, getting into the parliamentary process again, specifically in regards to the process for proposing amendments to the bill, it's very important that if the committee proposes amendments to the bill, it's very important to highlight the reasons for the proposed amendments to the bill. The committee must also demonstrate how the amendment takes into account the broad strategic priorities and allocations of the relevant budget. And then it's also important to show what the implications of each proposed amendment are for all the affected votes at vote level, but also in terms of the main divisions within that vote, or the programs as we call them. And then again, Chair, it's important to demonstrate the impact that the proposed amendment will have on the balance between transfer payments, capital and recurring expenditure in the affected vote. And then we also need to set out what the impact of any proposed amendments are on service delivery as well. So it's just a reminder of the processes or what needs to be considered if the committee should wish to make any proposed amendments to the bill. And then moving on now to the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Amendment Act, specifically looking at the provisions there that are relevant for the appropriation bill. Section 8.3 provides that the committees on finance must within 16 days or as soon as reasonably possible after submit a report to the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces on the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. And then if we look at Section 9.3, it provides that the division of revenue bill must be passed within 35 days after the adoption of the fiscal framework by Parliament or as soon as possible thereafter. And then Section 10.7 specifically talks to the appropriation bill and notes that Parliament must pass the appropriation bill with or without amendments within 4 months after the start of the financial year. So that basically means by the end of July, Parliament must have passed the appropriation bill. And then when we look at some of the provisions in legislation that specifically talk to expenditure before promulgation of the bill, as I noted in the previous slide, Chair, Parliament has got 4 months before they can pass the appropriation bill. So in between the beginning of the financial year and the end of July, which is the ultimate deadline for passing, the Section 29 of the PFMA then sets out or provides provision in terms of what can happen or needs to happen in terms of expenditure during this 4-month period before the bill is actually passed. So if we look at section 29(1), it notes that if an annual budget is not passed before the start of the financial year to which it relates, funds must be withdrawn in accordance with this section from the National Revenue Fund. And if we go to section 29(2), it then provides the specific limitations. So section 29(2) says that funds withdrawn from the Revenue Fund in terms of subsection 1A may only be utilized for services for which the funds were appropriated in the previous annual budget or adjustments budget. And then it says that in section 29(2)(b), that in the first 4 months of the financial year, the expenditure that is incurred by the departments may not exceed 45% of the total amount that was appropriated in the previous annual budget. And then during each of the following months, so after the first 4 months, it must not exceed 10% of the total amount appropriated in the previous annual budget. And these are also the areas that we check from the National Treasury when we do receive the projections for departments for the year. We make sure that in the first 4 months, departments are not planning to spend more than 45% of their budget. And then in aggregate, as section 29(2)(3), 2B3 notes that in aggregate, the amount that is spent may not exceed the total amount that is appropriated in the previous annual budget. So just to highlight as well, Chair, this is what the promulgation of the 2022 Appropriation Bill is therefore necessary to firstly allow for monthly expenditure above these transitional provisions that are contained in section 29(2) of the PFMA, as well as to ensure that expenditure occurs in accordance with the vote and program purposes as stated in the Act. Now, when we get to the bill itself, Chair and honorable members, in terms of how it's structured. So firstly, the bill sets out various provisions to govern utilization of the appropriated funds. So that's in the first few pages of the bill. That's where we've got various provisions to govern utilization of the appropriated funds. And just to highlight some of them, Chair, section 3 in the bill provides that an amount that is specifically and exclusively appropriated in the schedule may only be used for the purposes indicated unless the amount or purpose is amended by an act or in terms of an act of Parliament. So for those amounts that when we issue the allocation letters are exclusively and specifically appropriated in terms of section 3, they may not be used for any other purpose unless what they were allocated for, unless of course the purpose is amended through an act of Parliament. And then in section 4, it provides that the Minister of Finance may, in writing, impose conditions on any amount that's allocated in the bill, other than a conditional allocation, and that can be done in order to promote transparency and accountability, as well as the effective management of the appropriation. And then, very important, Chair, in section 4B, it notes that the Minister of Finance may also stop the use of an amount in respect of which conditions that are imposed in terms of section A are not met. So in those instances, then the minister would have to stop, and the department would not then be able to use that money that has been allocated. And then in section 5.1 of the bill, it notes that despite section 3 of the Act and section 43.4 of the Public Finance Management Act, which is on environment, the Minister of Finance may approve that unspent funds in an amount in the schedule allocated for compensation of employees be used within the same vote for transfers and subsidies for the payment of severance packages. So even though compensation of employees is also specifically and exclusively appropriated, the Minister of Finance may approve that the money that is allocated for compensation of employees be used within the same vote for purposes of making payments for severance or exit packages which are allocated under transfers and subsidies. Hence, that would require the National Treasury's approval. Section 5.1b provides that the minister may also approve that funds allocated for goods and services be used within the same vote for compensation of employees. So Those instances where a department may have a shortfall in their budget for compensation of employees during the course of the financial year, they may then write to the National Treasury to request approval to move funds from goods and services to offset the shortfall on compensation of employees. And then in terms of other elements that the Minister of Finance can approve in terms of Section 5.1, he may also approve that transfers and subsidies to other institutions be used elsewhere within the same main division or program, and then also that payments for capital assets as well as payments for financial assets be used elsewhere within the same main division. And then very important to highlight as well in terms of Section 5.2, the Minister may not approve the use of unspent funds in terms of subsection 1C, D or E for compensation of employees. So even though the Minister approves that goods and services may be used for compensation, but he cannot approve that transfers and subsidies, payments for capital assets, as well as financial assets be used to offset any shortfalls on compensation of employees. And then when we look at the other part of the bill, which is the schedule to the bill, those would then outline what the different allocations to each of the votes are. And that the bill or the schedule in the bill is divided in terms of vote and by main division or program within a vote. And then it also shows transfers and subsidies to the national department within a vote. And then for each and every vote, Chair, we also have a purpose that explains what that particular department is mandated to do. And then at program level as well, we'll also provide information on what the purpose of the program is, as well as the transfer and subsidy, so that it's very clear to those reading the bill exactly what this department does and what the different allocations at program level are, as well as the different transfers and subsidies that is made through that particular department. And then in terms of the structure of the bill as well, Chair, it will then be divided per economic classification. So one part will show the allocations in terms of current payments, which includes compensation of employees, goods and services, interest and rent on land. And then it will also show transfers and subsidies, payments for capital assets, and payments for financial assets, which are also the other economic classifications item as well. And then for those items that are marked specifically and exclusively appropriated, we do specifically indicate in the bills through the use of an asterisk sign to show, and those items that are earmarked as specifically and exclusively appropriated would generally include compensation of employees, as I've indicated, as well as conditional grants allocation. Those are generally all specifically and exclusively appropriated. And then very important, Chair, as well to highlight, the appropriation bill must be read together with the estimates of national expenditure, which is the other supporting document that the Minister of Finance also tables with the budget in February. So the estimates of national expenditure, or the E&E, as we call it, is the explanatory memorandum to the appropriation bill. So if members want to understand for a particular department exactly what are some of the key focus areas and activities that the department is going to be implementing in the financial year, then they can then look at the estimates of national expenditure, the specific chapter for that particular department, because the E&E contains the detailed information for each of the votes as well as its entities. And we do have it available online on the National Treasury's website. And among the information that's also included in the E&E, we provide the budget information over a 7-year period. So the 3 previous years, the current financial year that is about to end, and then we provide the estimates over the medium term as well. We also include in the E&E information related to the key performance indicators for the departments, and then other supporting information as well. We'll have information on the infrastructure spending in the department, the personnel spending, information related to conditional grants, and essentially, Chair, how institution plan to spend their budget allocation over the medium-term period, but also talking to the current financial year. In this instance, it would be the 2022-23 financial year. And then, Chair, before we get to the specific allocations included in the 2022 Appropriation Bill, we also thought that it might be important to highlight to members some of the key highlights of the 2022 budget that also informed the 2022 Appropriation Bill that we are presenting to you today. So very important to highlight, Chair, is the fact that the 2022 budget continues to consolidate public finances while providing immediate support for the pandemic response, job creation, and social protection. And I'll touch on some of those key allocations that were made in that regard. And then also to highlight, Chair, following the economic growth of 4.8% as noted in 2021, we are expecting that GDP growth will average about 1.8% over the next 3 years. So when we look at the total consolidated government spending over the next 3 years, which is the medium-term period, government is projecting to spend a total of 6.62 trillion over those the next 3 years. And Chair, more than 50% of that, or 3.33 trillion, will go towards the social wage, and I'll provide a breakdown in the next few slides of what the allocation for the social wage actually includes. And then when we look at main budget non-interest spending relative to the 2020-21 budget, we note that it increased by a net of 282.3 billion, and that's largely because of these allocations that were made in support of the pandemic response, job creation, as well as social protection. In adding or in increasing main budget non-interest spending, Chair, it's also important to highlight that the increase was supported by higher than anticipated revenue collections, and we did it in such a manner that it does not jeopardize the path to deficit reduction or the fiscal consolidation strategy of government. So if we look at the breakdown of that increase in main budget non-interest spending over the next 3 years, so the additional allocations in 2022-23, it's increased by 110.8 billion, in 2023-24 by 60 billion, and then in 2024-25 by 56.6 billion. And then, Chair, we are anticipating a primary surplus in 2023-24, and then the consolidated budget deficit is projected to also narrow because of the surplus by 2024-25 to about 4.2% of GDP. And then, Chair, just to highlight some of the key allocations. So in the previous slide, I made reference to the fact that there was an increase in main budget non-interest spending of 283 billion over the next 3 years. But if we zoom into the 2022-23 allocations, which is also some of them are included in the 2022 Appropriation Bill, we will see, Chair, on this slide that the biggest allocation of additional funding went to the social development function. They received an additional allocation of 44 billion, and that was specifically for the extension of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant, or the 350 grant, as some people refer to it as well. And then other allocation towards social welfare interventions and free basic services. We also had 14.6 or 7 billion that you see, Chair, was not allocated in 2022-23, but in 2023-24 and 2024-25, and that's to provide for the projected shortfall in CPI and the grant for double orphan. So it's not in 2022-23, but over the MTF. Hence, you will see the total of 14.7 billion there. And then we also allocated additional funding for the equitable share of about 4.2 billion in 2022-23, and the total allocation over the medium term was 28.9 billion. Just to highlight some of the other key allocations as well, Chair, in total, the health budget was increased by 10.8 billion in 2022-23, and the bulk of those funds actually were allocated to provincial health department to support their pandemic response as well. And then the education sector received a total of 16.8 billion in 2022-23. About 9 billion of that was allocated to provincial education departments to address, among other issues, shortfalls in compensation of employees there. And then about 7.8 billion was allocated to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to enable them to continue with the bursary allocation and sustain essentially the funding for students that are entering higher level institutions as well. And then about 10 billion was allocated for infrastructure investment and employment, but mainly 9 billion of that went towards the presidential employment initiative. And then in terms of other priorities, Chair, we couldn't list all of them because there's quite a number of them, but about 25 billion in total. 20.5 is for the provision for the wage. Basically, the 2021-22 wage agreement that was signed, it also had carry-through implications for the 2022-23 financial year. Hence, we have allocated 20.5 billion there. So in total, Chair, 110.8 billion in additional funding is included in the appropriation bill. And then, Chair, as I indicated earlier, the breakdown of the allocation for the social wage. So we've got about 188.8 billion that goes towards community development, that function, and that function includes, amongst others, housing development, transport, water services, as well as the local government, which includes the local government equitable share. And then about 266.7 billion of that went towards the basic education sector, 276.1 for social protection, which is mainly your social grants. And then we also have about 234 billion that is allocated to health, and then 24.8 is for employment programs, which would include the expanded public works program, amongst others, and the community works program. So just to highlight, Chair, here we are looking at the consolidated government spending. So it includes spending for the whole of government, which is why we then get to the 1.12 trillion for 2022-23. And then also included in the budget, Chair, we also have what we call a provisional allocation. So this is money that's included in the budget, but is not yet confirmed against any particular vote at this point in time. And for 2022-23, we would then do that confirmation in the 2022 adjustments budget. But before the money can be confirmed and allocated, there are certain conditions or requirements that would need to be met between now and the adjustments budget. And then only once those conditions have been met will the money then be allocated as part of the 2022 medium-term budget policy statement or the adjustments budget. And just to highlight the provisional allocations that we have for 2022-23, it's mainly 4.2 billion for the infrastructure fund, and then about 1.3 billion that is allocated for the COVID-19 vaccination program, and that will be to the Department of Health. And then, Chair, I also made reference to the fact that of the additional funding that was allocated, there was also about 9 billion that was allocated for the presidential employment intervention. This slide basically provides a breakdown of which department or programs and interventions within those departments were allocated additional funding, specifically for the creation of short-term jobs. And as you will see on this slide, Chair, we are anticipating or targeting that the 9 billion that has been allocated in 2022-23 will create about 539.05 short-term jobs. And the main programs that are funded as part of this, the biggest one would be in the basic education sector. About 6.2 billion is allocated for that. And then we also have got the Social Employment Fund in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition that's allocated about 862 million. And then we've got about 800 million that's allocated for the Metro Presidential Employment Program Innovation Grant, placemaking in townships, informal settlements and inner cities that's mainly led by the metros. And then we also have about 200 million that's allocated in the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability for the National Youth Service. So in total, Chair, the allocation for the creation of the short-term jobs, 513,905 is 9 billion. And then now getting into the 2022 Appropriation Bill, Chair, in total, we have allocated about 1 trillion in the 2022-23 Appropriation Bill. In terms of the breakdown per economic classification, the biggest chunk of the allocation is for transfers and subsidies. About 755 billion is allocated for that. And then about 261 billion is allocated for transfers and subsidies, and which is made up of your compensation of employees, 179 billion, and then goods and services, about 82 million, and then about 82 billion, sorry, and then payments for financial assets would then be allocated about 25.6 billion, and then 15.5 billion is allocated for payments for capital assets. And then, Chair, the next few slides, I will take you through the allocations in terms of the different economic classification. In each slide, you will notice, Chair and honorable members, that we do indicate or we highlight the biggest allocations for that particular economic classification. So we've circled all the departments that are receiving the bulk of the allocation, even though every department is getting an allocation with regards to the different economic classification, but we just highlighted the key or the biggest allocation. So starting off, looking at the vote level. So if we look at the overall allocations at vote level, about 61% of the total budget is actually allocated to about 5 departments, being your the Department of Cooperative Governance, as we show on the slide, receives about 111 billion in 2022-23, and then the Department of Higher Education and Training will receive about 110 billion, and then the Department of Social Development 257 billion, and then in the next slide we also show the allocations for police, who will receive about 100.7 billion, and then transport will receive about 69 billion. Chair, and then these allocations mainly provide for free basic services, post-school education and training in the case of the Department of Higher Education and Training. And then for social development, the money will mainly provide for social grants, the different social grants that we have. And then the allocation for the police is mainly for crime prevention and investigation. And then the allocation for the Department of Cooperative Governance will then mainly be for free basic services, and the one for transport is actually for the maintenance of the road transport network. So those are the allocations in terms of votes. In total, as I've indicated, about 1 trillion is then allocated to 41 votes. And then if we look at the allocation for compensation of employees, which is under the economic classification item, current payments, again, Chair, we highlight the biggest allocation on this particular slide. The Department of Higher Education and Training, which is also labor intensive, is allocated about 10.8 billion in 2022-23 for compensation of employees, and that is to provide for, amongst others, the salaries of over 16,000 TVET and then about 9,000 CET lecturers as well in institutions of higher learning and education. And then the other, in total, Chair, 179 billion is allocated for compensation of employees, and the largest allocations go to departments that are labor intensive, such as higher education and training, as I've mentioned, and then generally departments in the peace and security function, as I show on this slide, correctional services, defense, police, as well as justice and constitutional development. As we know, these are labor intensive departments. Compensation of employees is over 60% of the budget on average in this particular cluster. Hence, they receive a big allocation for compensation of employees. So in total, 179 billion is allocated for compensation of employees in 2022-23. And then if we move on to goods and services, Chair, which is also under transfers, which is also under current payment, sorry. The biggest allocations go to the Department of Cooperative Governance, and the allocation to the Department of Cooperative Governance basically provides for their operational expenses, but one of the main drivers of spending there would be the Community Works program. And then if we look at the Department of Health, about 3.9 or 4 billion of the health budget is for goods and services, and that mainly provides for medicine and medical supplies, contractors, and operating leases. So in general, Chair, the goods and services budget provides for the operational expenses of departments and in the main to enable them to acquire the tools of trade that they need to render and deliver against their mandate. So in the health department, one of the cost drivers under goods and services would then be your medicine and your medical supplies in line with their mandate. And then in the Home Affairs department, 2.9 billion is for goods and services, and that is mainly for, amongst others, computer services, operating leases, as well as property payments. And then in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, about 2.5 billion is allocated for, amongst others, travel. As we know, this is a very travel-intensive department, hence travel is a cost driver there, and then as well as operating leases and operating payments as well. And then in the Department of Basic Education, we've got about 2.2 billion allocated for goods and services, and that would mainly provide for printing and the distribution of workbooks for grade R to 9 learners, amongst other things. And then if we move on to other departments as well, on this slide, we will see correctional services, defense, justice and constitutional development, and police, once again in the peace and security department. The proportion of their goods and services budget is mainly is in proportion to the size of their budget. As I indicated in the earlier slide, they do have quite a big budget, and the goods and services budget is in proportion to that. And it's also mainly to provide for their operational expenses. And in the main, the cost drivers there would also include your operating leases, because as we know, they've got a footprint in different parts of the country. So the operating leases budget is quite huge for this department. And then also computer services, amongst other items, are cost drivers there. And then if we also look at other departments, agriculture, land reform and rural development is allocated about 3.8 billion under goods and services, and that's mainly for administrative support in the department. And then the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment is allocated 4.7 billion on goods and services, and that's mainly for agency and support or outsourced services. So in total, Chair, 81.7 billion is the total allocation for goods and services in 2022-23. And then if we move on to the next economic classification item, transfers and subsidies, again, we look at the biggest allocations. 106.3 billion is allocated to the Department of Cooperative Governance, and that's mainly including the local government equitable share as well as the municipal infrastructure grant. And then if we look at health, they've got an allocation of 58.3 billion for transfers and subsidies, and that's mainly for transfers to the health entities as well as the human resources and training grant. And then the allocation for the National Treasury transfers and subsidies is about 29.2 billion. And that's to provide mainly for the Treasury entities. As we know, we've got a lot of entities in the National Treasury, and amongst those is SAR. So that's 29.2 billion is mainly going towards transfers to the Treasury's public entities. And then in basic education, 24.7 billion, and that's mainly for the municipal, for the infrastructure grants, and then the school nutrition program in education. And then in higher education and training, we've got 98 billion there. And that will be mainly for subsidies for universities and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme as well. And then in social development, as I've also indicated earlier, the transfer they are mainly for social grants. So some of these departments, Chair, the bulk of their allocation is actually going towards transfers and subsidies. So especially social development, as well as the Department of Higher Education and Training, their budget is mainly for transfers and subsidies because they have to transfer it to where the service delivery essentially occurs. And then looking at some transfers and subsidies on this slide, showing the allocation for transport, 67.7 billion. And that's mainly, Chair, for transfers to SANRAL, PRASA, as well as several grants in transport, in the main, your provincial roads maintenance grant, the public transport operations grant, as well as the public transport and network operation grant as well. So in total, they allocated 67.7 billion in 2022-23, and in total about 754 or 755 billion shares for transfers and subsidies. So of the 1 trillion that we have allocated in 2022-23, as I indicated earlier, the bulk of that is actually allocated for transfers and subsidies. And then moving on to payments for capital assets, which amongst other things provide for infrastructure spending in different departments. The departments that are receiving the biggest allocation related to payments for capital assets, it would be basic education. It's got an allocation of about 2 billion, and that mainly provides for the school infrastructure backlogs grant, which is an indirect grant that is listed in Schedule 6A of the Division of Revenue Act. And then in health, it's an allocation of 1.4 billion, and that allocation mainly provides for the construction, maintenance, upgrading, and rehabilitation of new and existing health infrastructure. And then just some of the other spending on payments for capital assets, about 3.6 billion of the budget is allocated to the Department of Police, and that mainly provides for, amongst others, the construction and upgrading of police stations, as well as machinery and equipment. As we would know, in the police states, the police space, they procure a lot of specialized machinery and equipment in order to be able to render some of their functions, which is why machinery and equipment is one of the cost drivers under payments for capital assets. And then if we look at the Department of Water and Sanitation, they are allocated 4.4 billion, and that's mainly for the bulk regional infrastructure and water services grants, which are also indirect grants designated for special programs, and they are outlined in Section 6B of the Division of Revenue Act. So in total, Chair, 15.5 billion of the allocation for 2022-23 is for payments for capital assets. And then the last economic classification item, Chair, would be payments for financial assets. About 25.6 billion is allocated for that, of which 23.6 billion is allocated to the Department of Public Enterprises. And the allocation to the Department of Enterprises is to provide for the recapitalization of ESCOM, and then about 1.9 billion of the allocation for payment for financial assets is allocated to the National Treasury, and that is to provide for the recapitalization of the Land and Agricultural Development Bank of South Africa, as well as the multilateral institutions that where we are also members, such as the World Bank, African Development Bank, as well as the African Development Fund. So in total, 25.6 billion is for payments for financial assets. And then, so Chair, in summary, as I indicated earlier on, the 2022 budget does provide additional funding to continue to support the pandemic response and job creation, amongst others. But it's important to also note that the additional funding that I presented earlier on is not the only funding that has been allocated for new priorities. In some instances, new priorities or spending pressures in departments were also funded through a combination of reallocations as well as reprioritization, where a department would essentially look in what areas of their budget they can afford to shift some money to in order to fund new spending pressures. So reprioritization and reallocations were also instruments that we used to provide and fund certain key government priorities as well. In the context of additional funding, priority was specifically given to those interventions that are associated with the impact of COVID-19, as well as to meet urgent service delivery needs. And in summary, Chair, the largest allocations, 44 billion, was to extend the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant for 12 months. So that is until the end of March 2023. 7.8 billion was to provide financial support in the Department of Training. It was allocated to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme in the Department of Higher Education and Training, and then 4.2 billion for the local government equitable share, 9 billion for provincial education departments, mainly to address the shortfall in compensation budgets, 7.4 billion to provincial health departments to support their continued response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to bridge the shortfall in essential goods and services. And then lastly, 9 billion for the presidential employment intervention to create about 514,000 short-term jobs. And also just to summarize, Chair, so in total, about 71% of the budget is allocated for transfers and subsidies, mainly for your social grants, conditional grants, transfers to public entities and university subsidies, and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. The largest share of compensation allocations is going towards labor-intensive departments, such as those in peace and security, your police, defense, justice and constitutional development and correctional services, because they are labor-intensive. We have not made any provision, Chair, for compensation of employees increases above what the 20.5 billion that I highlighted, and that also because it's a carry-through cost from the 2021-22 public service wage agreement. And then about 1.5% of the budget is for payments for capital assets, and that's mainly for your indirect grants, such as your bulk infrastructure and etc. And lastly, Chair, any permanent new spending commitments, it's important that we highlight this. Even though we are providing additional funding, for example, for social protection, it's important to highlight that any permanent new spending commitments, such as any additional social protection over and above what we have provided for in the 2022 budget, has to be financed by more sustainable financing mechanisms, such as tax measures or spending cuts, in order to prevent a deterioration of the fiscal balances and ensure that the public finance are not overextended when the economic cycle turns negative in future. So Chair, just to quickly then touch on the second part of the presentation, which is the adjustments appropriation, the second adjustments appropriation bill, Chair. So that basically is to provide for the appropriation of money from the National Revenue Fund for expenditure that was approved in the 2021-22 financial year. And then if we look at specifically Section 12(1) and 2 of the Money Bills and Related Matters Act of 2009, it provides for the tabling of a national adjustments budget as envisaged in Section 30 of the Public Finance Management Act with an adjustments appropriation bill. So the 2021 Appropriation Act that we tabled with the budget in February last year, and that was then passed in July so that it can be an act. That particular act provided for the appropriation of money from the National Revenue fund for the 2021-22 financial year. And then in October or November, as we did last year when we tabled the adjustments budget, that was to effect adjustments to the appropriation of money that would have been provided for in the Appropriation Act. And this particular bill, Chair, and I've highlighted that in bold there, it provides for further adjustments that are required to authorize expenditure that is approved in terms of Section 6 of the Appropriation Act 2021 and Section 16 of the Public Finance Management Act. So that's essentially why this particular bill was also tabled as well. And then if we look at Section 3A of the bill, it notes that despite the effective date of this act, the appropriation of money for expenditure in terms of Section 6 of the Appropriation Act of 2020-21, it must be regarded as an appropriation and expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year. So even though it was done this year, it must be regarded as an appropriation and expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year, which is the previous financial year. And then in terms of Section 16 of the PFMA, it notes that the allocation must be regarded as an appropriation for the 2021-22 and 2022-23 financial years, and expenditure must be recorded in the financial year in which any portion of the appropriation is spent. So to the extent that some of the funds spill over into the current financial year, which is 2022-23, then that money must be recorded in the current financial year, even though it's included in this bill. And then, Chair, just to provide a snapshot of exactly what was allocated through the second adjustments appropriation bill, 18.1 billion was allocated under the National Treasury vote, but that was for transfer to the South African Special Risks Insurance Association for the purchase of equity. And I will provide more details on that in the next slide. And then 500 billion, Chair, was allocated to the Department of Health, and that was for the COVID-19 vaccination program. So in total, the bill provides for additional allocations of 18.6 billion. Then if we look at some of the details, starting off with the allocation to health, 500 million was allocated to the department, and that was mainly authorized in terms of Section 6, 1B of the 2021 Appropriation Act. And this allocation, Chair, to also highlight, it's subject to conditions, and among those conditions is the fact that the department must provide monthly reports on expenditure, as well as on the available supply and delivery schedule for the vaccination program. And then the other condition, Chair, is that the National Treasury approval must be obtained for any additional vaccine purchases. So these are the conditions that are tied to this allocation of 500 million. And it's also important here to highlight that it's not that only 500 million was allocated for the vaccination program in 2021-22. In fact, in total, if you look at the table that we're showing on the slide, in total about 8.8 billion in total was allocated for the vaccine program in 2021-22, and about 11.6 billion of that was for vaccine procurement and distribution, as well as putting up the necessary information systems to track the implementation of the program as well. And then about 3.4 billion was allocated to provincial departments of health, mainly to provide for their service delivery costs for the vaccination program. So that is the total allocation between 2020-21, when the pandemic first struck, and the current financial year, which is 2022-23. So in total, for the 3 years, it will be 15.3 billion that is allocated for COVID-19 related expenditure. And then, Chair, lastly, moving on to the slide, the allocation of 18.1 billion, as I've indicated, to the South African Special Risk Insurance Agency, and providing some more details on this allocation. So, Chair, due to the July 2021 unrest that we had in the country last year, the magnitude of the claims that were received by SASRIA actually resulted in them being technically insolvent, because the magnitude of the claims exceeded what the available budget that was available, and as a result, the agency was not able to settle certain claims that were made flowing from those July 2021 unrest, and they're also not able to maintain a minimum solvency ratio of about 100%, which is required by the Prudential Authority. So based on SASRIA's projection, their projection suggests that the claims that were received from the July 2021 civil unrest would actually amount to about 32 billion in total. So as a shortfall, they projected that they would need about 22 billion as an equity injection from government in order to be able to settle all the claims that they have received. So this is why 3.9 billion was initially provided through the second special Appropriation Act of 2020-21, and then 7.1 billion was thereafter provided through Section 16.1 of the Public Finance Management Act, and then 11 billion through Section 6.1b of the Appropriation Act. So this essentially, Chair, is what makes up the 18.91 billion total allocation to SASRIA, and is to basically enable the agency to settle its valid claims. And it's very important to highlight that it's only those claims that have been verified to be valid, because not all claims are necessarily valid that will be received as part of the July 2021 unrest. And then it's also to support the self-help initiatives that are being implemented in SASRIA, and to recover its solvency ratio to the targeted 180% in order to also create the buffer, because the requirement in terms of the Prudential Authority is 100%, but they want to create that additional buffer, hence the target is 180%. So as at the 14th of April 2022, Chair, SASRIA had settled claims amounting to approximately 20 billion. And following the receipt of government's additional support in the form of injecting equity into the agency, the external auditors were also able to confirm that they are satisfied that SASRIA would now be solvent, and they were able to confirm that it is indeed a going concern. And as a result, they also signed off on their annual financial statements for the 31st of March 2021, which would be for the previous financial year as well. And then SASRIA by June 2022, it confirms that it is anticipated to recover its solvency ratio to about 120%, and then provided that the entity manages to achieve a 90% claim payout rate in terms of the claims that they have received. And then overall, Chair, by March 2023, SASRIA projects to achieve a solvency credit ratio score of about 166%, given all these initiatives that are going to be or are being implemented currently. Chair, that is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your audience and those of the members. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Khadebe. Are you going to allow Department of Health, Dr. Buthelezi, to make additions, or will he respond to questions as they come? Have you covered the part? I've been struggling with the network, hence I'm not sure if you have covered all the presentation.
Okay, Chair, on our side, I covered the allocation as it relates to the 500 million that was provided through the second adjustments appropriation bill. So I'm not sure if there was expectation that they would provide any other additional information, but we did provide the allocation as it relates to the 500 million. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me check with Dr. Buthelezi if they want to make additions.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And and honorable members, and thanks to my colleagues from Treasury. We just want to concur with Treasury that we concur with all that was presented. We don't have any addition. We'll be ready to take on the questions. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Honorable members, thanks for your patience and your understanding. I have been experiencing a serious problem in as far as the network is concerned. And as usual, I will give members an opportunity to raise their hands and to ask questions. But before then, because I don't know if I will be on the platform when that time comes, let me try to raise issues that I wanted to raise. I will start with the hot potato directed to Department of Health. Dr. Buthelezi and the team from Department of Health and all the members, I'm sure you are aware that on the social media, the KwaMhlanga Hospital has been making news, and that is in Mpumalanga. KwaMhlanga Hospital is in Mpumalanga, Nkangala district at Tembisile municipality, what they be two. That's why I'm saying. The community at large, a way in which you have or the department has arranged in terms of the pharmacy. The pharmacy is next to the mortuary, and the complaint is around that people who are at the pharmacy at the queue to collect their medication, the outpatient, they are being traumatized seeing people who have passed on the corpse, and also the smell that comes from the mortuary and the people doing their rituals, people, the bodies being collected from the mortuary. They experience that, they witness that, and that is not well for their mental health, and also for their social being. It really affects them, and there's a huge complaint on the matter. My request is that because we amongst the priorities, we are speaking about the infrastructure development. I have a special request to the team Treasury to come closer to the situation together with the Department of Health in the province, to go and visit and see what the people are complaining about, because we can't leave the matter as if and look away as if we don't want to attend to that. So that is one thing that I wanted to start with, and also to you both as presenters. I think we are aware that the Presidential Employment Initiative Program, we also spoke about it yesterday, is allocated to a total of the 9 billion, and Ms. Khadebe has spoken about it. I just want to know as to how will the National Treasury, together with the rest of the implementing departments, make sure that those funds are earmarked for this program, and not returned back for the focus unspent. If you check in our report, we spoke about ring-fencing, but we were specific in terms of the salaries. So we want to know, I would want to know as to how is the National Treasury going to make sure that this department, these funds are spent for the specific allocated or targeted programs. And I also want to know if there are measures that are put in place to ensure that there is no under expenditure on the initiative I'm talking about the initiative of the presidential employment program. And given the levels of the unemployment, we know that we are facing the issue of the unemployment, poverty, and inequalities in South Africa. So I think that is the reason why we have this, and we want to follow on this commitment to make sure that is implemented. And you as the department who's responsible for the PAS and the programs, you are to make sure that the government is doing that, and we have a responsibility to make sure that you do that. One other question that I have to National Treasury is that can you indicate whether proper planning for programs and entities where provisional allocations will only be confirmed during the MTBPS 2022 had been done already? So my question is that for the MTBPS for this year, provisional allocations have been done, and what is the reason for such allocations to only be confirmed during the MTBPS, if not now? I also want to know, in terms of the addressing national and provincial departments, which are all municipalities, how far are you with that process, if you have started? And if you have not started, why have you not started? We want to know about that, and we have raised that in our report yesterday as a matter that needs your attention together with COGTA. There are many other issues I saw on your slides. You have raised issues on the police. I think that I will want to know, with regard to the police, if there is a there is a number of the police stations that require some attention. So I've spoken about infrastructure maintenance. This remains a challenge, you know, if you look at the state in which police stations are. So it's a challenge. So have you looked into that? Because I think our allocation of funds must speak to the needs and or the demands to address those issues for the sake of the public. I want to make an example about the Manguza police station, which also need to be completed and start functioning, given the level of crime in that community. So according to me, it's a beautiful state-of-the-art building, but there are unnecessary delays in completing that project. Can we be given more information on what causes such delays? I know you might say, or I might be told that this is the question that must go to the sector department, which is the police. But I think as Treasury responsible for the funds, if you have allocated a certain amount to a sector department, and they are not doing what is expected, and the community is not benefiting from that project, you must be concerned. So we want to know, I will want to know what is the delay in terms of that. Lastly, I would like to know whether the National Treasury had started doing some work around the reprioritization of resources to address the question of floods and heavy rainfalls that destroyed lives and infrastructure in KZN. I saw in your slide you have said something, but I would like you to unpack, to go further, deeper, if possible, in some parts of and also in some parts of the Eastern Cape. And if so, if you have done that, which programs are going to be affected by such a processes? I'll leave it at that. And if some of the questions that I don't have are not covered by what members have raised, I will come back to that. I see Honorable Muletsani, Honorable
Jadu.
Aida, Honorable Njatu, Honorable Detroit, and Honorable Ocamp. Secretariat, are these the only hands?
And Honorable Nkosi Mkiva, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Mkiva. Thank you. Ndate Mletsane, you can kickstart.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Let me acknowledge the presentation. Even though you covered some of the questions that I had, the one that is still outstanding is this one of the budget that has been provided to the police with the intention of building the police stations. They must is for the construction and upgrading of police stations. Having in mind that there's a budget for that, there are places that need urgent attention in terms of building the police stations. For example, in the Free State, there's a town called Botshabelo near Bloemfontein. This is the second largest township in South Africa with a population of around 450,000. And they only have 2 police stations in order to fight crime, which really it gives them serious problem. And there's a big rate of gangsterism there. Looking at this budget, I just want to find out from Treasury whether they will be able to be given attention so that they can be, so that the other police station can be built for them in order to be able to fight the gangsterism and the crime that is very rife in that township. Thank you for now, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ndate Mletsane. Honorable Ryder.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Yeah, I must say, I feel like one of those people who've just had a confidence trick played on them. You know, when someone catches you out moving things in front of you really quickly. Yeah, I didn't like the presentation. Everything in it was true. Let's just make that point. But whether it was honest is a different question. So I do think Mr. Muletsane has got a very good point. And I'm going to jump on that as well before I start with my own questions and say, you know, perhaps as the NCOP, it's something that we should be focused on, is the actual delivery of government services to our various provinces and the implementation on the ground. And perhaps we can have an indication from Treasury. I doubt they'll be able to do it today, but just, you know, what new schools, how many new schools are planned? How many new police stations are planned? How many new clinics are planned? I suppose that's more than the provincial side, but perhaps you can give us an indication of that, if not today, in due course. But getting to the presentation, my questions, Chair. Yeah, so there was comments about there's a primary surplus that's going to be achieved somewhere within the distant future. But what about now? Perhaps it would be nice to specifically state what the current deficit is planned, you know, and what's going to happen between now and that primary surplus. I think that would help us a little bit and guide us as to what this budget actually means in terms of the revenue and expenditure. The next question I have relates to the infrastructure-led recovery that President Ramaphosa has been telling us about, and the fact that I don't see an infrastructure-led recovery being prioritized in this budget. And so I noted that as one of the priorities, we had infrastructure listed on the slide, but then 9 billion of that was the Presidential Employment Fund. And I think placing that, I'd just like to know the logic behind placing that under infrastructure, because I don't believe that all of those jobs will be related directly to infrastructure, unless I'm totally misguided. But I don't think that that's from my reading of the Presidential Employment Initiative. It's not directly linked, and yeah, it's a very tenuous link if there is one. Perhaps you can expand on that and expand on that and just give us some guidance on. So yeah, I also want to ask, perhaps it's more in the medium-term expenditure, but we've seen, in spite of their previous communications in this forum, we've seen COSATU come forward with a 10% increased demand for their members. And perhaps Treasury can just tell us how that's likely to impact on this current E&E. Then going back to zero-based budgeting, there was no mention of zero-based budgeting today. I know it's a controversial subject and it's something that that is uncomfortable, but we were told before that there are 2 pilot projects that are happening. Can we get an update on those pilot projects? Can we hear if it is still a priority for Treasury? Obviously, we have a new minister. Is the new minister also of the same opinion as the previous minister that zero-based budgeting is a good idea? And is there still political will to pursue this going forward? Then, yes, I think that's important to ask about amendments. You spoke in the beginning about the fact that you can only use the Appropriations Bill to appropriate money, and then you spoke at the end and said, no, but we can change that and you can do adjustments. So what adjustments are being planned? And I think that the chairperson has raised the issue around the floods, but I wanted to ask about that as well as for the for Parliament. Obviously, we've had Parliament burned down, the National Assembly. What are the financial plans in terms of addressing that? Then I want to move on to the so as we get to these appropriations and departments are given money, we also read simultaneously about departments that owe municipalities hundreds of thousands and in certain cases millions, and it's national departments and provincial departments. So can Treasury just tell us, is there a guideline, or is there a, I know that you issue regulations and notices and instructions from time to time. Is there something that instructs departments to make their payments to municipalities promptly and timeously? Certainly seeing that municipalities are on the back foot in terms of collections, and if government departments are the ones that are causing a lack of service delivery, we've got a real problem. Then just on the health side, now we've heard a lot. So the adjustment appropriation, the special appropriation bill deals with SASRIA, and we've heard a lot from SASRIA, and I think that we're well acquainted with the issues there. My question is more on the health side, and would it be nice to have a presentation from health just to try and justify the amount that is being appropriated to them? And I think that we've seen a massive tailing off of vaccines. People have been vaccinated. There was a slow start. There was then a tremendous uptick, and now, of course, we're seeing a massive tailing off of vaccines. So why is the 500 million needed, and why could it not be foreseen? Why do we need a special appropriation for that? It just doesn't make a lot of sense unless one considers the fact that our new vaccine factory that we've built has not received a single order. You know, is it for that? Perhaps you can just tell us, you know, what specifically is the money going to be used for? Chair, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ryder. Honorable Njatu.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning, and also good morning to the members. Chairperson, on the municipalities which are in distress, my question will be that whether the 111 billion earmarked for corporate governance department will be adequate to assist local government to address the issues of municipalities which are facing financial distress, which are also adopting unfunded mandates, and those that are still owing ESCOM. So, Chairperson, that is in terms of the 111 billion in terms of assisting municipalities which are in distress, whether that will be adequate. And then I will also align it to the question that is on national and provincial departments who are owing municipalities. I would take it further to say that I think it would be important that we just don't raise it as a point, but also to have practical in terms of a template, that we will have a quarterly report on national departments and provincial departments who are owning municipalities, because it cannot be something that we will time to time just raise to say municipalities are in distress, and then there are not cooperation between the intergovernmental relations of the national and provincial to assist municipalities to deal with their financial issues. Then lastly, Chair, is that whether National Treasury can be able to provide us with a total cost of damage that happened in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, as soon as maybe possible, that we have a cost and indicate whether funding for such will be made available, after how long, since some of the communities are still stranded communities and which needed assistance. So it will be appreciated, Chair, if one can get a fact finding on cost, and also to see how communities are being assisted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Njatu. Honorable Dutoit.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, I've been partially covered. I think I've got 3 questions. I'm referring to slide number 14, where it's indicating that 20.5 billion rand provision for the wage bill adjustments. I want to know, according to National Treasury, I assume that this has to do with possible wage increases that might be occurring during this year, and what is the average wage increase percentage that they worked on, if this is the case, and that if it is expected. When we go to page 20, vote number 29, agriculture, land reform and rural development, if Treasury can maybe advise me with regards to if any provision has been made to assist the agricultural sector with regards to any further disruptions that might take place in this financial year, in the sense of droughts, fires, etc. If it will be listed under this vote 29 or under another vote. And then when we go to page 29, under public enterprises, that 25.576 billion rand, it's listed as allocations provide for the recapitalization of ESCOM, the Land and Agricultural Development Bank of South Africa, as well as the World Bank, African Development Bank, and African Development Fund. Now, the way I read it, this is funds that's been availed for bailouts, if that word is permitted. Is this the case, yes or no? If yes, can we please be provided with more information on that? And if yes, does the 9 billion rand for land bank bailouts form part of it? Is this part of the initial agreement that was made between Treasury and Land Bank, or are additional funds being availed for bailouts for this public enterprise and state-owned entities? That's all at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Du Toit. Honorable Ocamp, Willie.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, yeah, I think I have in a great sense been covered. A lot of questions have been asked with regards to government departments owing money to municipalities, etc. And I think that needs to be adequately answered, as well as the question with regards to municipalities that owe money and that has got unfunded budgets. So I'm not going to dwell on that any further. As I said, I've been partially covered. My big question comes in, and we had a discussion yesterday with regards to the hike in fuel prices, the hike in fertilizer prices, etc., and what effect that will have on the food security of South Africa, on the agricultural sector. Now, just as an example, in January this year, petrol cost 19.61 rand and diesel 17.28 rand per litre. The forecasts are that should the 1.50 rand levy that the government subsidized in up till the end of May, should that fall away at the end of May, there would be an increase at the end of May in petrol compared from January of 29%. And on diesel of 46%. Now, diesel, as we know, is the fuel that is used by our farmers, by the agricultural industry. And that bears the question, what effect will that have on the cost of producing food in South Africa? Then you've got to go to fertilizers. And if you compare, and I said that yesterday, but if you compare year on year, the cost of fertilizers, KCL fertilizer went up with 134.6%. Urea went up with 129.5%. And MAP went up with 73.2%. Now, so we are sitting with diesel costs. Sorry, Honorable Chairperson. We are sitting with diesel costs and the cost of fertilizers, which are some of the highest input costs that farmers have. Will that, in a certain sense, be subsidized? How are we going to assist our farmers to get over this burden? Because they will not be able to produce food at a level of profit that they could do in the past, and maybe not even at a level of profit at all. Then also, I want to add on with what the Honorable Du Toit said with regards to droughts. And the prolonged effect of droughts. The fact that we've received rain in most areas of South Africa does not mean that the prolonged effect of droughts have now all of a sudden been figuratively washed away. Grazing has been depleted over many years, and the prolonged effect of those droughts are that although rain fell, those farmers are still battling. And again, if I say farmers, and if I speak about farmers that are affected by diesel and fertilizer prices, I'm not talking about the big mega farmers. I'm talking about commercial farmers. I'm talking about small farmers, emerging farmers. Each and every South African will be influenced by these increases in the fuel prices due to the war in Ukraine. And I really think that we are going to be ignorant if this budget is not going to address that. We can sit here, but I promise you, the moment that people are really getting hungry because we can't produce food in this country anymore and we can't afford to move products from one shop to another or from distribution centers due to the increase in fuel costs, that will have a huge impact on ourselves. I also want to quickly just get to the whole thing of building schools. And I want to give you an example. A way back, I sat in council when I was still a councillor, and the Department of Health came and they addressed the council, and they said that in that specific area of Gasegunyana, there are 2 provincial hospitals, and each of those hospitals have about 450 births each month. In other words, 900 births every 2 months. A bit later, the Department of Education came and they said that in the last 3 years, they have managed to build 3 schools. So I stood up and I said, if we have 900 children being born every 2 months, we should be able to build a school every 2 months, because an average school takes about 900 to 1,000 pupils. So I think we are way behind when it comes to the building of schools and the improvement of infrastructure at schools. And we really need to look into that. The way in which our population growth is going is not catered for by the amount of schools that we are doing. I've been covered with the rest. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mkiva Okam. Honorable Mkiva, you're next.
If you look at thank you very much. Allow me not to set on my video here because of the stability of the network. Chairperson, I firstly want to welcome as well the presentation, and also to say that your opening remarks and the issues and the questions that you raised right on top of the opportunity for us to engage with the report, I'm also covered. Chair, I read in the news yesterday evening that more than 9 million South Africans have applied for that 350 special grant. And I just wonder if what is being put before us in terms of the amount will live up to that expectation. And perhaps if it doesn't, what would be the shortfall? I would love to hear from the Treasurer. And secondly, I want to also check how far are we to go if we were to continue in that trajectory for the next year and a year after. How long would it take for us to actually sustain that special grant? Of course, it is a very good one. It makes a great impact. Maybe also we may also have to look if the approach that we are employing in dispensing that is also a best approach. Is there no possibility that we could look at an alternative way of ensuring that the money goes is actually used for what it is intended for? That's one. And then secondly, on what Honorable Njadu has spoken about with the recent floods, you know, it's really a problem with the roads and the state of roads, particularly in the rural areas after these heavy downpours. It's difficult to drive. It's difficult to connect with communities. So I wonder is there an intervention that is to be made beyond just the immediate issues that relate to the state of disaster, as it were, but the state of roads are undrivable. It's difficult for people to connect. It's difficult for children to go to schools. And lastly, Chairperson, the issue of connectivity in the rural areas remain a sore point. Connectivity and the weakest signal of the telephony, Chair. It's a big problem for our communities, but primarily the schools. Children are unable to connect, are unable to do certain things online, and it disadvantages the children in the rural areas. It's as if, again, we always make this point that we live in 2 different countries. I think time has come for funds to be made available in a direction wherein we can turn a corner in that aspect, Chair. It will make a huge difference, because as we strive to have smart cities, let us equally strive to have smart villages. It's a point that we must make, that we must be unashamed that we are predominantly a rural country, and for us, that should not be treated as a curse, but it should be treated as a blessing. The only thing that needs to be done is infrastructural investment towards that direction. Listening to the president early this year when he delivered the State of the Nation address, he was very clear about these matters. And we want, when we listen to to these matters of the division, as well as the special bills, money bills that are being put before us, that they should actually follow on that marching line, which the president of the country has actually stated quite categorically. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I would love to hear a response on those matters.
Thank you, Honorable Mkiva. The last one on my list, Honorable Karen.
Yeah, Chairperson, I did explain to you and the staff that I'm unavailable at 9 o'clock. Just to say, firstly, that, well, actually, I just have one major question. Zulani's partly covered me. It's, the money that's been promised by Treasury, I think it's R1 billion, for the flood disasters in KZN. Now, it's been said that the money is not coming. It's being held up by Treasury. And so progress on delivery of relief aid and rescuing of infrastructure and so on is being undermined. Now, obviously, there have to be clear conditions under which the money is given. We've had the experience of the PPE and so on. So the first thing I want to ask is it accurate that Treasury has not delivered the money? Can the officials explain, if that's the case, where it's likely the money will be delivered? What's holding it up? But obviously 1 billion is nowhere. I've seen different figures. The last one I saw said it's over 25 billion, at the very least, to bring the infrastructure back to where it was, and also provide adequate relief and build the necessary houses or alternative accommodation for those who lost that. So basically what I'm saying is there an assessment by Treasury? Then are there conditions that both Treasury here and in KZN and with our MEC here for COGTA and Finance, have conditions been set on how the money is dispersed to avoid what happened previously happened? I know there are various safeguards, but can they please spell that out? Then our second issue, Chairperson, I'm not saying it should be addressed now. It's a question addressed to you. Whether you think that you can, maybe help towards structuring our meetings such that, what we end up with, Chairperson, is a list of a shopping list, all of us, including me, right? So we flood the ministry and department with questions, and like it's a long shopping list, they can't reply to everything. They will then give us written replies. Now, we can continue to do this, which is the way most, if not all, committees function. But is that going to help us? Shouldn't we actually focus on, like in our report, we're going to put a shopping list of issues raised. I mean, most of the issues raised, Chairperson, are valid. The question, though, is, are we going to get any outcomes if we give a shopping list of 50? We've raised this before. You ask for 50 things, you'll probably end up with 4. If you ask for 20 things, you'll end up with maybe 7. So is there some way, Chairperson, between you, Pelonani, and the staff research unit and so on, we can structure the meetings a bit so that maybe we focus on specific themes or issues and then get them addressed? Rather than now, coming back in another 6 months and another in February next year or thereafter, and, each of us raising like all these issues, it's like a long list. And you can't carry on like this. We may feel good we're raising the issues, may feel good we're battering Treasury and so on, but that's not going to, if you listen, Chairperson, finally, it's about process. I don't know what the answers are, but it's the things that you and the staff should try to pull your heads together and come to some conclusion about. But if you look at the issues people are raising, the drought, the floods, the COVID issues, the war in Ukraine, the difficulties of a million different projects here, right? I mean, it's horrific, right? So what are we going to do? Just raise questions endlessly, or are we going to restrict our questions? Okay, we're prioritizing these 4 issues in this area, and members, can you raise questions in that regard? Then the next 3 sets of issues or something like that, Chairperson. Otherwise, what are we going to get? And finally, we batter Treasury. There's no money, as we know. And we know there's many reasons for that, right? Not least our own failures and mismanagement and all that. But at the end of the day, we are where we are. And for all the reasons that we know, there isn't the money there. So they have to prioritize. And that means we can raise 12 questions, but say we want these 3 addressed today and the next 3 addressed some other time. Thank you, Chairperson. I don't know whether it's easy to do, but it's something you might want to reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable members, for the questions. Can I request team Treasury led by Dr. Mampumdise?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, honorable members. I just want to share a couple of presentations in order to respond to the questions that I got. So the first one, Chairperson, that I wanted to discuss was the issue on the zero-based budgeting. The National Treasury did a framework, and this framework was published a year or so ago, and this was presented to Cabinet, and Cabinet adopted the framework. So basically, it would have been good for the Secretariat to please enable me to share the presentation. But basically what we did, Chairperson, when we were putting together this framework is that we looked at the concept of zero-based budgeting. We asked the countries that have implemented zero-based budgeting to come and assist us so we can learn from them. We also-
Just hold on. I see Honorable Karim's hand is up. Is this a new hand? Is it an order?
No, Comrade Chair. No. I said more than enough. Thank you. I'm sure you're tired of listening to me. No, sorry. Yes, I should have lowered the hand. Sorry.
Thank you. You can continue, Dr. Mdise.
Thanks, Chairperson. So as I was saying is that the framework looked at the experiences from different countries in the OECD, and we had workshops where they basically explained to us how they implemented this zero-based budgeting in government. And we looked at the possibility of how we can do the same in the South African government. So basically, Chairperson, the learnings from these countries were that, first of all, zero-based budgeting is too tedious. You can't expect a big department such as health to explain why they need to buy a pen or why they need to buy paper. So if you do it like that, Chairperson, it means it's gonna take forever. You're not gonna reach the desired results that you need. So basically what we then did was, when we were designing this framework, we looked at the components of zero-based budgeting that we can use as the South African government to do proper spending reviews. So basically what we then did was we looked at what are the core lessons of zero-based budgeting and how can we implement this? So basically from these learnings, the countries, we asked the ministries of finance, basically what they said was that zero-based budgeting takes a lot of time and it requires too much paperwork, and governments in general have to focus on service delivery. Therefore, they don't have resources to fully implement zero-based budgeting on its original form. The second issue was that it is not easy to basically merge the zero-based budgeting theory with the practice. Thirdly is that the difficulty is the implementation of zero-based budgeting. So basically, if we had to go to the Department of Health, and then who are they supposed to motivate why they need a pen to? Do they motivate to Cabinet? Do they motivate to Parliament? So basically, they're going to spend a lot of time trying to motivate why they need to buy milk or need to buy books or need to buy medicines. And also what we looked at is that the manner in which we can do this is basically follow these steps of zero-based budgeting. We identify a program in a department, and the criteria that we will use to identify this program would be, one, the allocation, the budget allocation. So the focus would be, let's look at bigger programs rather than focusing on the small little programs. Secondly, we look at the impact that this program will have in the functioning of the department. We also had to look at that. And so and then the criteria was also looking at value for money, whether these programs have been providing value for money. Then what we then do as step 2, we analyze each of these programs using the tools of the spending reviews. So basically you go through a whole detailed analysis of the numbers.
My apologies, Mampo, you have been unable to share.
Yes, I don't know, Chairperson, I just decided to talk from okay, now I can share. I just decided to speak from my presentation. So okay, let me just share properly. Okay. No, I can share now, Chairperson. So let me just make this big. Thanks, Chair. Hopefully you can see the presentation now. Yes. So thirdly, we then evaluate these programs that we have assessed. And then from there, we look at how do we then formulate the recommendations that that we find. So for example, if we're looking at a building or rental fees, how do we then formulate or make sure that we package it such that it's easy for departments and cabinet to make a decision. And then fourthly, we prepare the detailed outcomes of the spending reviews that we have done. So basically the reason why we looked at the spending reviews is basically the improved spending efficiency over the medium term. So this project was not meant to do this in the short term, and we acknowledge that there are so many programs in government where we need to assess, and most of them were because we introduced them in 1994 and we have been doing incremental budgeting, so we haven't had time to reassess whether there's still value for money and they're still impactful in terms of service delivery. And then also what we're looking at is that there are some programs that of course are still relevant, but there can be operational improvements in the way in which we implement these policies. So we had to look at that. But most importantly, Chairperson and honorable members, in last year, when we had to have significant fiscal consolidation, we basically had to consider how do we assist departments to still be able to deliver services in a constrained fiscal environment. So these were just the targets of the spending reviews and what we wanted them to achieve at the end of the day. This was the project plan, the methodology, Chairperson, that we used to do the spending reviews. This is very detailed, and what we did was we requested GTEC to assist us, and this project was done between National Treasury and the line departments. We did it for all of the national departments. We haven't done so for provinces and local government. And despite the fact that we announced that we're going to have piloted projects, the key thing here is that we decided that because we have to pay GTEC to skill us, it's better that we go through all the departments so that the CFOs and the other guys in the financial part of the department are able to understand the methodology and be able to implement the methodology. So Chairperson, this is what we have done in terms of the zero-based budgeting. The results that we published are the results that we published in the budget review for the National Treasury, where we looked at several of their projects. I just want to get to chapter 5 so I can give you the exact projects that we implemented. Yes, so basically for the National Treasury, the spending reviews that we've done, Chairperson, we did the spending reviews. We looked at the consultancy fees. We looked at the efficiencies there, and we looked at, the quantum, how much does the Treasury spend on compensation fees? And then there was a recommendation that the department develops an internal policy to govern the use of these consultants, because what we realized is that the Treasury spends 1.9% higher than spending on compensation on these consultancy fees. Then we also looked at the funding for the multilateral banks and the common monetary area, where basically it's another big spending program at the National Treasury. And basically there are some recommendations there in terms of how we think the Treasury Department can identify savings in these for these multilaterals. And also what we did, Chairperson, is that we also assisted the department in identifying savings or reprioritization within their own baselines to deal with some of the pressures that can materialize from these commitments for the multilateral institutions. So, Chairperson, we have done over 200 of these spending reviews. Now, the process that we need to follow is that when Minister Kodongwane came in, I was in the process of presenting the spending reviews and the outcomes to Cabinet. And the reason why we're doing that, Chairperson, is because some of these reviews require retrenchments. Some of these reviews require policy changes. Some of these recommendations of reviews will require legislative changes. So basically, we need to present it to Cabinet so that Cabinet can see what we're proposing. And then once Cabinet approves the recommendations, then we can come back to Parliament and present this. So for example, we have looked at some of the proposals that some of these public entities can share resources in terms of administration. Now, if that is going to save funds, then the question would be, what then do you do with the people who are providing the services currently for the different entities? Do you move them across the departments? That discussion and decision has to be taken at a Cabinet level rather than at the technical level. So that's where the process is. We have done the spending reviews, Chairperson and honorable members, and once Cabinet gives us a go ahead, then we will certainly share all of these with the honorable members. Then the second presentation, Chairperson, that I wanted to do, which is just a slide, is basically on the adjusted appropriation bill. There's been questions there on what type of transactions we're going to consider when we do the budget, and why are they not considered when we do the MTBPS, not in the budget. But basically, Chairperson, what we look at in the adjustments budget, which is very stringent, is that if there are significant and unforeseen economic and financial events, then we need to look at the fiscal framework. And we have done this through COVID, and then we had a special budget to deal with COVID. But on a yearly basis, we have transactions which qualify for unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure. Most of these are disaster related. So when we do the assessment for Parliament and partly for the drought, some of these applications can qualify for unforeseen and unavoidable. But what we will then have to assess, Chairperson and honorable members, is that we will assess, one, the costing, whether it's a reasonable costing. The departments need to give us a plan on how they plan to resolve or spend this money, short-term, medium-term, long-term, because the unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure will only be for the current year. So if, for example, fixing Parliament is going to take more than, which it will probably take more than 3 to 5 years to fix. For this year, we can look at the short-term intervention of what needs to be done, and then they can then follow the normal budget process to deal with the rest of the issues. The other transactions that we look at during the course of the year is when there's what we call an emergency, and we have done so with some of the allocations for COVID, a special section 16. All of those transactions, if there's any which we don't foresee, will form part of the MTBPS, the adjustment budget. we also have expenditure that will have been announced by the minister in the speech, but probably at that time the costing was not ready. Therefore, we can also look at that in the adjustments budget. And we also look at rollovers and some of the shifting between and within votes. So Chairperson, it's very strict the way in which we do the adjustments, but of course, the disaster in KZN and also the parliament buildings, if they qualify for some of these adjustments, we will definitely consider those. But Ulrika will deal in a great detail on the issue of the drought and the funding thereof, and the explanation of the 1 billion. Now, Chairperson, the question then on, I'll just stop sharing now. The question on the presidential employment intervention. So the presidency does a very tight job in ensuring that they monitor the spending and the performance of this on a quarterly basis. So I think it would be good to have them to share this with you. But Honorable Ryder, I don't think we have ever classified the presidential employment intervention as infrastructure. This is the third year that we have the presidential employment intervention, and when we implemented it in 2020-21, we were very clear that this will be done to boost short-term jobs. It was never the intention of the presidential employment intervention for it to be classified as an infrastructure. The way we're so stringent in this, we look at the number of people that will be employed rather than the infrastructure that will be used by the employed people. So we would have never have classified it as infrastructure. It has always been classified as short-term employment. The way we also look at it is that we look at it as augmenting the EPWP programs that already exist. In terms of the issues of the making sure that payments are made within 30 days in a fair manner, I mean, we do try, honorable members, to issue guidelines in terms of the Treasury. But what I wanted to remind the honorable members about is the fact that the PFMA, which is the Public Finance Management Act, that guides us in this, holds the accounting officer responsible for ensuring that all the payments are done on time and they do verifications. I mean, I know that this is a big problem and we try to intervene in terms of the Treasury, but we can only intervene by issuing guidelines and instruction notes. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, this responsibility lies with the accounting authority or the accounting officer of a department. Let me ask Bothwell to deal with some of the agriculture questions, and then the rest of the team will follow. And I will then ask Ravesh to deal with the bailouts, DPE, and then Edgar to deal with the fiscal framework and the wage bill questions. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Dr. Mdise. Do you need Ms. Khatebe to add on in terms of the responses from Treasurer before we go to Dr. Buthelezi?
Thanks, Chair. There's a list of people. Yes, there's a list of people who need to respond to the specific questions, please. Bothwell, are you on the call?
I am, Doc.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, honorable members, good morning. Chair, I think there was a question related to agriculture and support to farmers, all the farmers, in terms of the effects of the disasters that they faced. Honorable Chair, I think let me hasten to say, firstly, that in the budget, there is an allocation under the conditional grants called Comprehensive Agriculture Support Program that is meant primarily to support emerging and subsistence farmers with inputs. So basically, the farmers are provided with inputs to assist them with production and productivity. That's the first issue that has been raised. But as to whether the budget has been geared towards the current circumstances, I think the way we have dealt with the disasters, such as drought, Honorable Chair, is through.
My apologies, Mr. Tega, can you please switch on your video if you can? Because we are live.
Can you see me, Chair? Chair, can I continue?
Yes, please.
I wonder if IT will be happy with your framing, but we see you, you can continue.
Let me try.
Yeah,
and can you see me?
Yeah, it's fine. You can see your shoulders. It's fine.
I was hoping not to put a video, but thank you, Chair. So I was saying the issue of support, it's provided through the Comprehensive Agriculture Support Program, which is allocated almost 7 billion over the MTF. But I'm coming through the issue that has been raised in terms of whether there is an allocation towards disaster for farmers. The way the department and National Treasury has always approached previous disasters, Chair, has been through the framework for disaster management that Dr. Modise has highlighted that Ulrike will be able to present. So that's how we have addressed previous disasters and previous unfortunate circumstances happening in the agricultural sector. For example, Chair, I think there have been a number of disasters, especially related to pests and diseases affecting farmers. I think some of these things, they are addressed through the Act, where farmers are actually compensated for their losses, particularly commercial farmers. So some of these things are addressed through the Act, and there are provisions that have been used previously, and they're available going forward as well. Thank you, Chair. On the issue of input cost, still on farmers that have been raised, fertilizer, and so forth. I think, Chair, this is a big outcry in the sector, which probably need a lot of attention, because I think the issue here, and the Competition Commission has done a lot of work in terms of the anti-competitive, because the prices, Chair, are not only rising because of the current circumstances. Even before, the prices have been quite at unsustainable levels or very expensive levels for farmers. So some of the issues that the Competition Commission, maybe it's worth for the committee to also hear from them. They have done a lot of research and seen that there is a lot of anti-competitive behavior amongst producers of agricultural inputs, which in turn affects the agricultural cost, and obviously results in higher prices for consumers and the general public of South Africans. So these are some of the issues that are critical in terms of answering the honorable members' questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who else is on the lineup? Dr. Modise Mampo.
Thanks to Gillian Wilson. Julia, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Sorry, good morning, Chairperson and members. I'm just going to speak quickly to the issue of planning for schools. As the members would be aware, that is a provincial function. And the reason that it has to be a provincial function is because the school has to be staffed. So provinces will budget for school infrastructure in relation to the number of learners as well as teachers that is required. The National Department of Basic Education, as members are aware, has a conditional grant, the Education Infrastructure Grant, which is a Schedule 4 supplementary grant in the Division of Revenue Bill. And that amount, which Mpumi spoke to earlier, is 12.4 billion for this year. That gets added to whatever provinces are budgeting for school infrastructure. And that is how school infrastructure then gets rolled out in a combination of the conditional grant as well as provinces' own budgets. But it is essentially the province's decision in terms of planning, the planning of schools. And I'm sure they take the facts into account where there's more population, etc. But members will also be aware that you have to also deal with the municipality in terms of land and land use. So it is not something that happens instantaneously. There has to be quite a long-term look at where people are moving to, where there's land available, etc. Thanks.
Mark?
Good morning, Honourable Chairperson and members. I'll just try and take two of the questions. It's Mark Fletcher. I work in public finance on health and social services. So just on the questions from Honourable Ryder about the 500 million for vaccines. So the DG of Health and his team can add a lot more detail on that. But from the Treasury side, we are fairly careful in the way we allocate towards vaccines. So we didn't recommend, the full budget up front at the beginning of the year because we wanted to check, how the progress went on both purchases and use of vaccines. So there's been a progressive change in the budget as the numbers have increased. The actual budget request for this was over 2 billion. And looking at it quite carefully, we then brought that down to the 500 million, which we have recommended in the second adjustment budget. And, that's turned out to be fairly accurate. And the 21-22 year is now more or less, come to an end. So we can see in the final spending numbers from the Department of Health that 500 million is, pretty much spot on accurate. And so that is indeed, needed by the department. So, it's just trying to be fairly accurate in the allocations. There is further allocation for vaccines in the 22-23 budget, which the DG can talk to. On the question that the honourable member raised about the 8 million uptake of people for the SRD grant, will that be sufficient? So the uptake in April, because people had to re-register, was 8.1 million people, and in May was 9.8 million people. The budget makes provision for at least 10.4 million people. So at the moment, we have not yet reached what the budgetary provision is available. Our team still sees currently at the moment about R1 billion space in the budget. However, we will continue to keep a close eye on this along with the Department of Social Development and SASSA. There are a number of changes also in the way the grant is being implemented. Firstly, the testing of people's incomes against their bank accounts is going to happen a lot more extensively this year than last year. Last year, they only used to use the bank account testing in appeal cases. Now everybody's bank accounts are going to be checked. So that also might give a greater degree of accuracy. Something that we have suggested to social development is that they need to look potentially at, for example, the income of the spouse. This is not currently in the regulations, but if the numbers are going too high, should, for example, the spouse of, for example, a nurse or a police person, for example, be getting the 350 grant. So if the numbers are going too high, that's also something they may want to look at along with the means test that they've currently applied. That was just answers to those two questions. Back to the next speaker, Dr. Modise.
Ulrike?
Who's the next speaker?
Good morning, Honourable Chairperson and members. So I will deal with the local government issues that was raised and the disaster issue. So I'll start on the disaster matters first. So let me just explain that the disaster management value chain has 4 stages in it. So before a disaster happens, you have a disaster mitigation plan, you do disaster preparedness, then the disaster happens, and once the disaster happens, we have 2 separate phases. The one is immediate relief or response, and the second component in that is reconstruction. As the President had announced with the declaration of this disaster, that we have 3 phases here. The first phase is to deal with humanitarian relief. The second phase is to then deal with stabilization. Those 2 components makes up what we call disaster response or immediate response. And then we have the reconstruction, which can take longer. Honorable members, in relation to the disaster relief and from a budgeting point of view, we have 2 components in how this can be done. The first is a reprioritization within national budgets. Those budgets, and Ms. Khadebe had explained this earlier, in relation to the flexibility that we have in terms of Section 29 to spend funding to spend budgets before the Appropriation Act is passed, and how we have the authority to shift some money around in the budgets within the limitations that is set out within Section 43. The billion rand that everybody is referring to is in the second component around conditional grants and expenditure and conditional grants. The immediate relief grants, and we have 4 such grants. We have the provincial and municipal disaster response grants on the vote of the Department of Cooperative Governance. And then we have the provincial and municipal housing emergency grants on the votes of the Departments of Human Settlements. So these 4 grants makes up the 1 billion rand that we refer to as money available. The way these funds flow, Honourable Chairperson, is that it is done at the request of the National Transferring Officer. So provinces and municipalities need to send requests to the Departments of Human Settlements and the Department of Cooperative Governance. And once they have then okayed it, would they then send it to the Treasury? Funds will flow within 14 days of us receiving a request. We have not received any requests from the National Disaster Management Centre or the Department of Cooperative Governance or the Department of Human Settlements as the national transferring officers to let these funds flow. But what has happened is other provisions that this committee has been dealing with in relation to the Division of Revenue Act and the 2022 Division of Revenue Bill is in relation to a reprioritization and a reallocation within conditional grants to respond to disasters. And there are 2 components within all of that that's provided for in Section 19 of the 2021 Division of Revenue Act and in the 2022 Division of Revenue Bill. And this relates to, under disaster circumstances, the National Transferring Officer, with a joint request from the NDMC to the Treasury, can reprioritize funds within the grants, and the provisions that we have around the reallocations of grants in terms of Section 19.3 of the Division of Revenue Act, that would allow us to move money between provinces or in relation to this disaster. Now, what have we received and what have we processed? We have received and processed a request from the Department of Human Settlements in relation to using the Human Settlements Development Grant and the Informal Settlements Upgrading Partnership Grant to respond to the disasters. We have received a request and processed it for the Department of Water and Sanitation in relation to water tankering services for 3 months using the Water Services Infrastructure Grant. And we are currently processing the requests from the Department of Transport in relation to a reallocation in the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant. Chairperson, I am aware that both the Provincial Disaster Management Centre and the Provincial COCTA has sent through requests to the National Disaster Management Centre to start the process in dispersing the immediate response grants, and we are waiting for that from the Department of Cooperative Governance so that we can move forward and let the 1 billion rand flow. In relation to questions on other municipal issues, the question in relation to the funding that we have for the local government equitable share and whether this assists municipalities who are in distress. The allocations on the local government equitable share, as this committee knows, is through the formula that we have as part of, that was explained as part of the Division of Revenue Bill, and the large component of the funding and the additional funding that has been provided for this in this allocation relates to the increasing costs of providing free basic services to poor households in municipalities. Bulk costs on electricity and water have increased, and we compensate municipalities for those costs in relation to the provision of free basic services. Just on guidelines on municipal debt and what national and provincial departments owe municipalities, like any other creditors that government owes, the Treasury regulation sets out the responsibilities of accounting officers in how they need to manage their cash and pay what is due. And so the requirements is no different to pay municipal services, like in terms of the Treasury regulations. So provinces and national departments will have to do this within 30 days. Where there are matters related to that, where they don't do any of those things, any interest that is earned on late payments would possibly be fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and the accountability framework through the internal audit and the external audit, and how the accounting officer then deals with those matters is how we then deal with this. Chair, that is all of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you
please
very
go
much.
ahead.
Thank you very much, Ms. Breton. Do you still
think
have another input, Dr. Mampo?
Yes, Chairperson, just two more. Ravesh to deal with the SOCs and Edgar Sishi to deal with the wage bill questions, Chair.
Sorry, Mampo. Before they come
will
in,
come after.
I just wanted to come first, Chair, because I'm just wrapping up the public finance related question, the one on police stations specifically. So if I can go first.
Okay, you can go first, and then the other two will come after you. And I'm requesting that you be economic with time, because we still have one other item that we have to deal with, but give more information as possible as you can. Members have to go for another commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll be very brief. So I think the questions on police stations were asked by yourself, Honorable Moletsane, as well as Honorable Ryder, in terms of what are the projects that the department is planning, and from a maintenance point of view, how many are constructions, etc. So Chair, just to maybe clarify again, so on the slide I indicated that about 3.6 billion is allocated for payments for capital assets, and of that amount, about 961 million is actually for the construction and upgrading and maintenance of police stations. So the rest would be for other machinery and equipment, such as the vehicles, etc., that the department procures. So if we just focus on the 961 million, that's for the construction, maintenance, upgrading, and refurbishment of police stations. So Chair, in 2022-23, the department has got about 330 projects that are planned for this particular financial year. But just also to clarify, Chair, that under the category of building, construction, upgrading, and refurbishment of police stations, is that it's not just on the police stations themselves, but other areas of service delivery that are tied to the police station. So it would also include your shooting ranges. It would also include forensic labs, just as an example. And then if we look, Chair, at the breakdown of the 330 projects that are planned for the 2022-23 financial year, we've got about 18 of them that are actually for planned maintenance. And of the 18, 10 would actually be for the maintenance of the police academies across the country. And then also included in this category is also infrastructure upgrade that the police would make in relation to installation of generators, as well as air conditioners. So if you look at the 330 projects, about 141 of the projects are in relation to the installation of air conditioners in various police stations. And then we also have about 24 that relate to the installation of generators, about 20 that have to do with the construction or refurbishment related to victim-friendly services, Chair. And as we know, those services are to enable that when a victim of gender-based violence, as an example, visits a police station, there must be facilities that are appropriate to be able to deal with those particular cases. So they've got about 20 projects that are related to that, and then about another 20 that are related to creating accessibility for people with disabilities. And then in terms of the actual construction, how many police stations are actually under construction in 2020, will be under construction in 2022-23? It's actually 3 projects, Chair, that have to do with new police stations that are being constructed. And in terms of information that we received early this year from the department, one of those police stations is in Limpopo. It's called Muyekle. And then one is in Northwest, it's called Dwarsberg. And then another one is in Northern Cape, it's called Rimvasmark, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I do not see any project related to, I think it was Munguza or in Bochabelo. So I think maybe the department might be best placed to provide further information as to what is being done in those particular areas. And then, Chair, very briefly, members also asked what causes the delay in infrastructure delivery or in the construction. And from a police point of view, I can say that one of the key issues is the dependency on the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, because most of the projects for the department are being implemented on its behalf by the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. And generally, there tend to be delays, both in terms of project management. We also hear issues about the non-performance of constructors. Some constructors even abandon the project site before the project is even completed, which then forces the department to then start a new process of getting and procuring new contractors. So we have on our side been engaging both departments, and we've been consistently saying that there's a need for improved collaboration between the two of them in terms of the planning of both for the projects themselves, but also in terms of the management of the contractors whilst they are on site. So those were the questions, Chair, on police. And then maybe just quickly, members, there was a question by, I think it was Honorable Araida or Dutoit in the chat on what is interest and rent on land. Just to quickly explain that interest and rent on land is basically interest that we pay on borrowed money. So the interest that we pay in relation to loans or bonds that we have. So our debt service costs, as an example, would then be accounted for as part of interest and rent, and rent. So the land part is for that land that we are using and for which we have to pay rent as well. So I hope that clarifies. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Ravesh.
Thank you, Nampulelo, and good morning to the Honourable Chair and Honourable members. Just in relation to the question around the support for the SOC, so there is the 21.8 billion that's been provided to Eskom in 22-23. So this forms part of the 230 billion support package that was announced in 2019. And then there is the 1.8 billion support to SAA.
Sorry,
this
Ravesh,
is purely for
Ravesh, sorry, if you can just adjust a bit because your mouth is cut into 2 pieces. Your lower part, yeah. Thank you.
There you go. All right. And then just in terms of the support to SAA, that's it's 1.8 billion for 22-23, and this is purely to support or to help settle the government guaranteed debt. So this is the last tranche that is there that's available for SAA in terms of the 16.4 billion of guaranteed debt, and this is the last tranche to basically set off all government guaranteed debt for SAA. And then there is an amount of 6 billion that's been provided for land bank in this fiscal year as well. I think there's a further 1 billion for the next fiscal year. Chair, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Edgar.
Thank you. The next is Edgar.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson. My apologies for, I've got a problem. I had to switch to a mobile, so I don't have my video on, so please accept my apologies. But I'll be extremely quick. Honorable Ryder asked a couple of questions. The first is on the fiscal balances. So I would refer Honorable Ryder and members to two documents. The first is Chapter 3 of the Budget Review, which clearly outlines both the estimated fiscal deficit on the main budget level, as well as on a consolidated basis, as well as the projected primary fiscal surplus over the MTEF. The second document is the Section 32 report, which we published on the 29th of April, which also clearly outlines the exact fiscal deficit as at the end of the financial year. Specifically, looking at both documents, we can see that the estimated fiscal deficit was 5.5% at the time of the budget. The actual outcome was 5.2% as reflected in the Section 32 report published on the 29th of April. And the projected primary fiscal surplus is a very small primary fiscal surplus of around 0.02% of GDP. So that's clearly outlined in there. And then finally, on the public sector wage bill, the wage negotiations are currently underway. They started last month in April. And so obviously there's not really much we can say. We have to allow the wage negotiations to proceed in the Public Sector Coordinated Bargaining Council. The council has indicated that the parties have agreed to aim for the end of June to finalize the wage negotiations, which means to the question around what will happen, what we'll know, within the next 6 weeks, honorable members, we will know, hopefully, what will happen in respect of the outcomes on the public sector wage bill. Thank you, Chairperson.
Who's next? Still on that one of the public sector wage bill. I'm happy that we have requested that you must finalize it. It's there, but the problem that has always been persisting is that you have set aside money already while you're still negotiating. So you'll see how you get out of that, but we don't want to see what we have seen in the previous year.
Oh, I can talk to that quickly.
Okay.
So yes, Chairperson, as we indicated in the MTBPS, which was tabled in Parliament in the first week of November 2021, the funds that have been set aside were set aside as a result of a component of the agreement last year, which said that should we not reach, and this was an agreement reached with labor, by the way. So this is not a unilateral arrangement. It's actually an arrangement which was agreed to with the public sector labor unions, that we would set aside an amount that is the same as the amount that was paid out in the previous year, right? And in the agreement, this is referred to as a safety clause, should there not be an agreement. So that is the amount that has been set aside in the budget, the 20.5 billion. But all the other details, including, as honorable members have asked, the percentages, who will get what, and so on and so forth, that comes out of the negotiations at the PSCBC. That's not something that we determine ourselves. Thank you, Chair.
Loud and clear, we do. I've raised this with an understanding that the negotiations are not done between yourself and the organized labor. It is done in PSCBC, but you have to fund. I was just concerned, PSCBC and the major department debt being DPSA, but I was just raising the issue of setting aside, and I'm happy that it's informed. There has been a settlement, so to say, an agreement, so to say, an understanding. We have found each other to say, let's set aside this much, irrespective of the negotiations that are still on. Can I give the other member, the last member, to speak on the matter before I, Honorable Titoit, is that an order?
No, it's not an order, Chair. If I could just ask a clarity-seeking question, if that will be allowed,
Okay.
please, with regards to the wages.
Yeah, you can.
Thank you, Chair. To Treasury, thank you for the detailed response that you gave. I want to find out, with the funds that's been set aside, obviously it's an estimate. Will there be additional salary funds also enclosed in grants as what happened recently, with a salary component included in early childhood development grant, as well as the health grant, etc.? Thank you.
I think it goes back to you again.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Honorable Detroit. Thank you, Honorable Chair. So the public sector wage negotiations do not cover specific or parochial conditional grant issues. They cover purely the remuneration, the base remuneration of public servants in the national and provincial spheres of government. They don't deal with the specific sector-related parochial matters at all. And so I would say that in thinking about that question, that issue would be separate from the bargaining council discussions. Thank you.
Okay, I'd rather leave it at that and not engage further with the matter. Who's the last one from Team Treasury before I hand over to Dr. Buthelezi?
We are covered, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mampo. Dr. Buthelezi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and thank you once more to all the honorable members and also to my colleagues from National Treasury. I think the mainly two issues that were referred to health. One was from the Honorable Chair on the issue of KwaMhlanga Hospital. I have taken liberty to contact the head of department of the Mpumalanga province and have asked them to kindly prepare a report for us that we will send to the chair within the next 7 days, so that the chair and the committee can be informed before they plan the visit. We were hearing the matter for the first time, and I have been promised a report within 7 days that we will submit to the secretariat of the committee. Then the second matter was actually raised by Honorable Ryder on the issue of the vaccines. Why special appropriations, seeing that the actual vaccinations are going down. Before I hand over to my CFO to deal with the matter, I would like to mention that, yes, we are aware that we are struggling with the numbers, and we're doing all that we can to ensure that we get as many people vaccinated as a department, and we work on a daily basis to ensure that we promote the issue of vaccination so that we are able to have a good immunity as a country. I must also mention that vaccination is still the main solution that we know will assist us, as we are currently having a spike in infections. So I will then, with the indulgence of the chair, request that our CFO responds specifically to the question. Thank you very much. Mr. Andre Venter.
Thank you, DG, and thank you, Honorable Chair. Just to add to what Dr. Blecher informed the committee about, yes, the vaccines, Chair, the budget allocation for the vaccination program in the 2021 financial year, as appropriated through the Appropriation Act and the Adjustments Appropriation, amounts to 6.6 billion rands. the contracts the department had to enter into to secure 59.8 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines resulted in an actual expenditure at the end of the financial year on the 31st of March into 7.736 billion rands. Chair, that is a shortfall of 1.044 billion rands. So the 500 million rands will be applied to reduce the shortfall for the procurement of the vaccines and running the vaccination program for South Africa. Fortunately, Chair, there is also still a 657 million rands coming from the 1920 financial year, where 1.2 billion rands was also appropriated and made available under Section 16 of the PFMA to the Department for the Procurement of Vaccines. So the 637 million rands, Chair, together with the 500 million rands that is now presented in the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill, will enable the department to clear the shortfall of the 1.044 billion rands that we experience on the vaccination program for the end of the financial year. And this is why we really need these funding, Chair. We don't have any additional funds on the vote to cover and stand in for this expenditure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Team Health. Any additional information? Dr. Buthelezi, are you done?
Yes, no, thank you, Chair. That's all from us. We really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay, I've requested the Secretariat to give you, furnish you with further information on the issue of KwaMhlanga situation, so that you can see what people are saying. Thank you very much, Team Treasurer. Can I check with the members if all their answers, the questions have been answered? Honorable members, can we move?
Honorable Chairperson?
Yes, Honorable Njatu.
Yeah, Chairperson, I think I just want to commend the team. I think the questions was was answered very detailed. From my side, I'm happy. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, Honorable Njatu, and much appreciated for the cooperation and the insight and detailed answers as presented to us by all the members of the different teams, Team Treasury and Team Health. And I think this is what we will expect from you all the time when we request you to come here, because we need the explanations, we need understanding before we agree on other issues, or we take on other we take decisions on other issues, so that our decisions must be informed. And you as technocrats and you as managers in those departments, implementers in those departments, you are the only people who can help us. Thank you very much. And we might maybe also call you with your political leaders in the future if there is a political intervention or clarity that we seek as the Select Committee. Thank you very much for the presenters. We can now release the presenters, and the members stay behind. We go to the minutes of the 11th of May, 2022. Can you enlarge the screen?
Is the screen okay now, Chair?
No, you are almost full on the screen. You are half the screen, and the minutes are half the screen. I don't know if
Okay,
it's my,
let me redo it, Chairperson. Just please give me a second. Thank you, sir.
okay. Yeah. No, you are on full screen. You are on full screen. I don't know how to unpin you, but if I unpin you, someone else will be there.
You mean, Chairperson, on the screen, you see my face, not the minutes.
I see a quarter of the minutes, the screen of the minutes, a quarter, 3/4 is you.
Okay, okay.
We can see it, Chairperson. We can
You
see
can
the
see it.
whole, yeah, we can.
Chairperson, we can see it clearly.
Thank you, Honorable Ocampo, for that. Yeah, as long as members can see clearly, can we move with our minutes first page attendees? Let me put on my spectacles. Page 2. We're now on page 3, yeah? Page 4. Page 5. That's the last page of the minutes. Members, as you say that you can see the full screen and you have received the minutes even before this, can I get a mover? If you
I move,
agree,
Chairperson. Thank you, Eunice.
if you agree that this is the true reflection of the discussion, everything has been captured. I just got a mover before I could finish. Honorable Karen.
I second, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dutoit, for seconding. We have come to the end of our meeting for today. Let me once more thank you, honorable members, for your participation and provocative questions to the participants or the departments. Thank you so much, and let's go and prepare ourselves. I understand some of the members here are going to participate in the debates. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Long live the chair.